50 years ago, the average adult had 3 good friends. Today, that number is 1.5. A recent article in the Boston Globe stated that the deadliest disease among middle-aged men isn't obesity or heart disease, but loneliness. Yale University recently offered a class called Psychology and the Good Life, a class on happiness. 1,200 students enrolled. We live in a bizarre time where on one hand we're more connected than ever, but on the other hand we've never felt so disconnected and alone. We have lots of shallow, surface level connections. We're super busy, we see people all the time, but strong, vital relationships are at an all-time low. Our weak connections are hurting us. We're longing for something real, and we're missing it. A recent longevity study examined the places on Earth where people live the longest and have the most joy-filled lives. There's a few pockets on Earth where groups of people live these great, fulfilling lives. So, a bunch of smart people got together and they studied why that happens. They came up with a list of common traits of these communities. Here are 3 of the things they found. First, the individuals in these communities had high self-worth and purpose. They had a good relationship with themselves. Second, they had an important belief in God or spirituality or a higher power. That means they had a strong relationship with God. And third, they lived in close-knit communities where people loved and cared for one another. This means they had vital relationships with friends, family, and neighbors. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was asked, what was the most important thing to know for life? He was asked, what's the most important teaching, or what are the words to live by? His answer was remarkably similar to what these studies found. He said, love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He said you're meant to have a vital relationship with God, a relationship of love. He said you're meant to love neighbors, those around you, the friends, family, coworkers, and even the people next door. You're made to have a vital relationship with others. And he said, love those neighbors as you love yourself. We spend a lot of time frustrated and even hating ourselves. But God made us to have a vital relationship with ourselves, where we even love ourselves well. The great work being done in modern social sciences are discovering what Jesus knew to be true 2,000 years ago. That's one of the reasons I love Jesus and why I listen to what he has to say about life. In the upcoming weeks, in our church community's gatherings on Sunday, in the heart of Red Bank, we're going to have a series of talks called Vital Relationships. These talks will help us dig deeper into what Jesus taught about our relationships with God, one another, and ourselves. It's going to be good. It will be good for you. And hopefully it will help you grow your vital relationships. The series starts on Sunday, April 15th. Thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll see you on April 15th. So we're beginning the series by talking about our relationship with God. We're meant to have this vital relationship with God. We actually believe we're meant to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, which sounds daunting, right? It sounds really scary. Can anyone love anything with all their heart, all their soul, all their mind, and all their strength? But before we dive into that, I want to take a starting point by how does God see us? How does God see you? When he looks at you, what does he say? What is kind of his fundamental look when he looks at you? We hear this, we're supposed to love God, so this vital relationship we're supposed to have with him where we love him. How does he see us? That's what we're going to talk about today. And to get at this, I want to give an illustration, and I realize this illustration is a little bit weird, but stay with me. There was this TV show in the 70s called The Dick Cavett Show. Has anyone, you've heard of it? Yes, all right. Has anyone else heard of this? David's heard of this show. It was a a comedian actually who did a lot of long-form interviews, so he'd kind of do these in-depth interviews. And he had John Lennon and Yoko Ono on one time. And John Lennon was explaining when he met Yoko Ono, and John Lennon is a member of the Beatles, and Yoko Ono became his kind of famous artist wife. And he met who ended up being his future wife at an art exhibit. And this was 60s art. I'm not giving you an analysis of whether this is good or bad art. This is a helpful illustration. In this show, there was a ladder in the middle of the space, the art space. And if you climbed the ladder, there was something written on the ceiling. So you climbed this ladder and there was something written. So you had to climb the ladder though to see what was written. And so he climbed the ladder and he looked up and there was one word and it said, yes. Now again, you can decide whether that's art or not. That's up to you. But I think it's a pretty cool illustration. If you could climb a ladder to heaven and talk to God, if you could climb up there and see him, what would he say to you? Would he say, are you a yes to him? Are you a no? Are you a maybe? If? Right? Some of us, if we're honest, right, we think, how does God see me? God looks at me and says no. Or God looks at me and says, maybe if. Maybe that's a lot of us today. Maybe if. Maybe it's like if you've seen the movie Gladiator, or if you heard of like the gladiator battles, at the end of the battle, whether it's a good battle or not, the emperor will decide who lives and dies, and he kind of gives this. If you've seen Joaquin Phoenix in the movie Gladiator, right? All right, some of you are nodding. He does this, and he wants to have the guy die, but the crowds are cheering him on, stuff like that. Is God like that? Are you looking at God and he's like, or yeah, right? Is God a yes or a no to us? So to get at this, how God sees us, I'm going to share 3 stories, and Brian read them. The 3 stories that Jesus told in a row. And Christians believe that Jesus is this God. He's God who come to be with us. And not only that, he has this special relationship with God the Father, and that can be confusing to some people. But just stay with the story. So Jesus tells these stories, and he tells them to give people a picture of who God is and who humans are. So the Christian communities believe this Jesus has come from God. He's actually pointing us, actually showing us who God is. And Jesus tells this story that we're going to share today. And he actually tells lots of stories. But just think about this for a moment. Even if you've been in church for a long time, he tells this story, and people are so inspired by it, so overwhelmed, so amazed by it, that they keep telling the story to one another. This story that Jesus tells today is so good, so powerful for so many people, that it gets written down and becomes part of the Christian community's sacred scripture. The man who wrote this story, Luke, his goal was to figure out an orderly account where he could explain to people who Jesus is. And he made sure these stories were a part of it. And not only that, this story has actually become a big story in the Islamic tradition too, in Islam. And we're going to get to that at the end of the story, actually, so stay with me on that. But this has been a story that's inspired people for thousands and thousands of years. And Jesus tells it as a picture of who God is and how he sees us. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through it. There's a lot of different kind of background stuff that will be helpful. The more we understand, the better it'll be for us. I'll walk through some passages. We'll talk about it, things like that. All right. So it begins, and this is Luke 15 if you want to follow along. Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." This is the context into which Jesus is going to tell this story. He's with a bunch of sinners, right? These tax collectors, and tax collectors were kind of seen as the traitors. They were particularly bad in this society. So these tax collectors loved Jesus. And when he says sinners, they're probably thinking of a lot of people that were considered to be sexually immoral at the time, prostitutes. And along with that, there were probably some other people who were on kind of the margins of society, people who were particularly poor, or people who were lame or crippled in some way, people that the world might have seen as kind of cursed by God, people on the edges of society. And these people all seem to crowd around and want to be around Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes start grumbling. And these are the religious leaders. And the charge they have against Jesus is, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. And he's friends with sinners. To eat with someone in that society was a big deal. It was who you were identifying with. It was who you wanted to be friends with. He was fully identifying himself with these people that were really, really bad sinners, really messed up folks. And people couldn't understand that. He wasn't giving some money to pay for prisons that could take care of and rehabilitate. He wasn't throwing some change on the side of the road to help people that were poor. He was eating with sinners. He was fellowship with them. He was friends with them. So they're grumbling. So Jesus decides to tell some stories to explain why he eats with sinners. So he told them this parable. Which of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over the sinner who repents than over the 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Okay, there's a lot going on here we might be missing if you're not a first century shepherd. Anyone a 20th century shepherd? Okay, so some background here. All right. Which of you, having 100 sheep and losing, would not go after the 99? First of all, these people he's talking to, these religious folks, they would have been pretty wealthy. They would have expected the story to go, which one of you losing one of your 100 sheep wouldn't have grabbed one of your servants and sent them to go and get the lost sheep? So they wouldn't have been doing manual labor, so it would have been weird for them to sit and say, oh, why are you asking me whether I would go get this sheep? I might be concerned that some of my property is lost, but I would get one of my servants, and that servant's job would be to get the sheep. Now, that's important because Jesus is telling the story to these religious folks and explaining why he eats with sinners, why he sees sinners as valuable in some way. And he uses the illustration of shepherd, which in their shared scriptures, what we call the Old Testament or the First Testament, several times the leaders, the religious leaders, the kings, the priests, the people like the scribes and the Pharisees were called shepherds. They were given the task, they were meant to shepherd and to care for and to take care of the people. And several times they failed at that, and God calls them kind of bad shepherds who failed to take care of their people. And even there was these prophecies that God himself would have to come and be the good shepherd. So a little bit of a dig in this story is probably Jesus saying like, hey, you guys are supposed to be the good shepherds of the lost people, of the hurting people in society. I'm kind of doing your job. Maybe I'm hanging out with sinners because I'm doing your job and you're not doing it. Maybe a little dig there. When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. Now, if you've heard this story, if you've been in a church, you've probably heard this story. If you went to Sunday school as a kid, this is an easy story to tell because it's cute and there's sheep and things like that. This is a big deal for the shepherd. It's like a 3 days journey. It probably takes you a day to find the shepherd. You got to carry it. You got to lug the thing back. It's a big deal that you lose one. These are probably communal sheep. Your street, your neighborhood, you might pool all your sheep together and take turns. You might have 10 sheep. You might contribute to the common pool. And so that one sheep is lost. It kind of affects everyone. The whole community is invested in keeping these sheep together because kind of your wealth is tied up in your neighbor's wealth and things like that. So there's this big celebration. There's this rejoicing. And Jesus ties it to, just like this rejoicing over a lost sheep, God is excited and rejoices in heaven over one lost person more than the 99 who need no repentance. Which also might be a subtle dig from Jesus to the leaders too of, maybe there's 99 of you who don't need to repent, but the one who does, when he repents, there's rejoicing in heaven, which, maybe he's implying a little bit of, maybe we all need to repent. Maybe we all are lost in some way. So one other question I have when I read this story, and maybe you've had it, what about the 99 other sheep? Have you ever thought that? Like, this is a bad idea, like practically. If you're the shepherd and sheep get lost, right? If you're the shepherd and you leave all of the sheep who could get lost also to go find the one sheep who's lost, is that a bad idea? Think of it this way. Pretend you're one of the other sheep. Pretend you're sheep 93, right? We'll assume sheep 100 got lost, right? So, but you're sheep 93. You're towards the back. What about maybe a week ago, you were grazing on the side of the hill, all the other sheep got up, went to the other side, and you were lost for a few minutes. But then the sheep came around, you got lucky, they showed up, you were back with your herd, right? Now, you were probably lost and scared in that moment. And you probably wondered, is anyone going to come for me? Would anyone take the time? And it probably makes sense. You probably think, no, there's 99 other sheep. My shepherd's probably got to watch the other sheep. If I'm lost, I'm probably gone. But think about this. Now you're one of the 99, you're safe, one of them gets lost. You have a shepherd who's willing to go and find the lost sheep. What does that do for you as one of the sheep who's not lost now? It makes you feel safe and good. Because you know, maybe tomorrow I get lost. And you might be thinking, you know what? When I get lost, no one's going to come for me. I'm worthless. I'm just a sheep. There's 100 other sheep. Do I matter? No. My leader's probably going to take care of whoever's left and not come and find the lost sheep. And now you know you have a shepherd that if you get lost, this shepherd will come and find you. All of the sheep would feel safer knowing that they have a shepherd who's willing to go and hunt down a sheep when it's lost. That's the first story Jesus tells. He tells a second one. So there was 100 sheep, and someone goes and finds one lost sheep. The next story. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So he tells this story about a woman who's lost a coin. What probably happened back in that day, and we don't even have coins anymore. We have credit cards and things like this. So the woman might have 10, 15 coins. The husband might be away on business for a while. So the woman's role in the society is often running the household, conducting business for the family, going into the marketplace, buying food, overseeing things, maybe overseeing servants or craftsmen or things like that. So she might have a bundle in a rag of coins that's supposed to last her a week or two. And each coin's probably worth a day's wage. And so losing this is a big deal. It's kind of hurting like how you're able to function, how you're able to operate. So she loses this coin. She's kind of ashamed. She's concerned. She's scared. And she's scouring the house looking for this coin, which it actually makes sense that it's kind of hard to see this coin. Their houses would have been, they wouldn't have had big windows the way we have windows. They would have had kind of slats. So it's usually dark in their house, so you'd have to light a lamp if you lost something. And their floors were usually constructed of smooth stones people would find, but they weren't cut. Like you wouldn't take the time to cut out stone, and so it's nice and clean. So there'd be kind of spaces between the rocks where coins could get lost. And actually, modern archaeologists love this. Whenever they find like a regular person's house, they're always finding these little coins because they get stuck in there and it's dark in your house and you can't find this coin. So she sweeps the house, looks over all of it, and finds this coin and rejoices and calls her friends together. And Jesus says, look, this woman who lost a coin, there's rejoicing of the angels in heaven. He's trying to show these Pharisees, these scribes, like, look, maybe God is like a shepherd, and when one of his sheep is lost, he leaves the 99 to go find them. Look, maybe God is like a woman who's lost one of her coins and can't do the business that they're meant to do, and does everything she can in her house to go find this lost coin. And look, in both these cases, whenever you find something that's lost, you rejoice. So he tells that story. He tells two stories, and he's going to tell one more. And this is actually a common method of storytelling, that you would tell one little story, another little story, and then you'd open it up into a big story. So he tells this one story. There's 100 sheep, right? And it's worth going after one lost sheep. There's 10 coins, each coin worth maybe a day's wage, and it's worth going after that coin and then celebrating when you find that coin. Now I want to tell you a story about two humans, two people, maybe 1 and 2. Would it be worth going after that one? So the story continues. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them, the father. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to the distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute or reckless living." All right. There's a lot there in just those few sentences. There was a man with 2 sons. If you've heard this, who's heard this story before? What's it called? It's called the story of the prodigal son, right? Even the Bibles that we read today say that it's the story of the prodigal son. Jesus starts the story by saying, a father had 2 sons. This is a story about a father and 2 sons. He opens with 2 sons. He closes with 2 sons. The full story involves 2 sons. It's really important that we see, especially for the ending of this story. Also, if you look at the context, Jesus has Jesus is telling the story, and there's a group of sinners, and there's a group of these religious folks. And this story has a father figure, a younger son, and an older son. And what happens in this story is the son says, the younger son decides, give me the property that I will get. What that means is, I want what is coming to me monetarily when you die. I want you to give that to me now. It is a death wish. He's saying, Father, I wish you were dead so that I could get what I think I deserve and what's coming to me. Now there's a biblical scholar, a man named Kenneth Bailey. He wrote a couple books on just this story, basically. And he lived the bulk of his life in the Middle East. And the Middle Eastern culture hasn't changed a lot in thousands of years. It still operates kind of in these kind of same ways. And he asks people, he tells people all the time this story. And he says, has this ever happened in your tribe, in your neighborhood, in anywhere? Has this ever happened where a younger son has come and said, give me the inheritance now before you die? And they all say, never. This has never happened. He says, why not? He says, this would be beyond offensive and wrong. No father would ever accept this request from his son. Every father would be, the son would bring shame and dishonor to the family. The father would reject the son's request. He would not give away any of his resources, and he would disown the son. That's what the son is requesting in this story. He is asking the father to die so he could get what he wants. Now, the father does something that no father in this story would do. The father in this story is not like the Middle Eastern patriarchs that they would have expected. They would have expected that. This son would be told off, disowned, stricken from the family. Instead, this father gives the son what he wants. The father allows the son to reject him. He allows the son to humiliate him. He allows the son to break the relationship. And what the father could have done is broken the relationship, kept all of his resources, gone on with his life and said, I only have one son now, and then not had to suffer anymore. Just said, all right, I have a son who's worthless. I cut him off. I'm going to move on with my life. I'm going to keep building my wealth, keep building my empire. But instead, he allows the son to leave. He gives the son his resources, and he decides to suffer the burden and the loss and the pain of the broken relationship on his end. He doesn't disown the son, but gives the son what he wants. Now, just to show a bit more about the heinousness of the son's request, this act would not just hurt the father, it hurts the whole neighborhood. This father's got a lot of resources. He's probably taking care of somewhere between 20 to 50 families. And your wealth back then was not in money. It's not like he had $1 million, gave the son $300,000, and then just cut it off. The wealth is in your land. The wealth is in your houses. The wealth is in your cattle, your animals. So, and what you do is you kept those things and you kept accruing and you got interest and then you left those to your sons. And then their sons built it. And you had people doing jobs and working. So this was this whole economy. So when the son says, give me what is owed to me or give me the property that I will get, the father has to liquidate assets. He's going to sell on the cheap. This is like, anyone in a family where everyone knows everybody's business? Okay, most people are still, that's still the same today. But back then, Everyone would have heard what was going on. Everyone would have known what was going on. Everyone would have known the son did this atrocious thing. Servants would be overhearing this. Word would get out super quickly. So the father has to sell this stuff off within a day or two. In that society, you negotiated for weeks and months to get every last coin and things like that. People would have taken advantage of him. They would have taken a huge loss. And you would lose, you're responsible for 50 other families, and all of a sudden, in 2 days, you lose a third of all your assets. That hurts every family by a third, or people lose jobs. It tanks the whole economy. This son is doing something horrible to the whole neighborhood. And what the son's doing is he's cutting himself off from any chance of coming back into this neighborhood. What the tradition they had back then was, if a Jewish person took his father's money and left and then spent it recklessly among the Gentiles, that when he tried to come back, the townsfolk would meet him at the gate and they'd smash a pot in front of him and disown him and say he's not welcome back and he's worthless. I believe the word is kazaza. There's this kind of phrase that you would reject this person who went off and did something horrible. Not only that, the depth of foolishness that this son did also is he got rid of all of his safety nets. You don't have a pension from your union in that society. Your family is your pension. You don't have Social Security that you pay into. Your family is your Social Security. You don't have dating apps where you meet people. Your family is the one who gets your marriage secured. So all of the different things, you don't have disability, all of that, all of your wealth, all of your protection, all of your safety is tied into your family. And he's saying, cut me off from the entire family. I want to go do what I want to do. And more than that, he says, give me what is due to me. He doesn't ask for the inheritance, which is really interesting. What was supposed to happen is you would get the inheritance. Inheritance, though, meant you would take on the responsibility. You would rule. You would reign in your father's place. That meant you would represent your family in disputes. Or that meant you would take care of the people your father's taking care of right now. You would have a charge to go and make more money for your family, make more wealth from your family. And he's rejecting all. He says, I don't want inheritance. I don't want any of the responsibility. Just give me the money. Give me the stuff that I think I can get, and let me run off and go and do those things. One last piece here before we keep reading. I know this is a lot of stuff to take in. The older son isn't really talked about here. Kenneth Bailey, who I just mentioned, he would ask, what's the older son's role? And all the Middle Eastern men he talks to always had the same answer. They'd say, the older son has a responsibility here. If the younger son is fighting with the father and the father's fighting with the younger son, the older son has a responsibility. He should be going to the younger son and trying to get him not to do this heinous thing. He should be talking to him. He should be negotiating with the father how the son and the father can reconcile, because the father, humiliated and shamed, wouldn't take the first step. It would be on the son to take the first step, to apologize for what he did. But what would happen is there would be a mediator, and the older son was meant and supposed to be the mediator. And in this story, he does nothing so far. He lets him go. So, the son humiliates the family, shames the father's grief-stricken, bearing humiliation, bearing rejection. Verse 14. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. So he probably showed up in this foreign land, this Gentile land. They would have known he was Jewish. He's from a foreigner from a different place. He probably started spending some of his money to accrue some friendships, and then bam, famine hits. Severe famine. Severe famine in the Middle East is bad. It's bad up until the 20th century. There's stories of when these famines hit, people are dying in the streets, people are starving to death. It is hard to survive. There's stories in the Middle Ages, stories of in different generations where people would brick up their houses when they were about to starve just to make sure they weren't eaten by wild animals, because it was just kind of a disaster when severe famine hit. So this severe, awful famine hits, and he hires himself out to one of the citizens. A citizen's probably someone with a little bit more resources, so there are probably a lot of people trying to hire themselves out, just get some jobs. And Hiring himself out's probably not the right word. He's like a clinger, probably. He's probably just grabbing onto this person, doing stuff, hoping to get paid. If you've ever traveled, have you ever traveled to a country and then you get out and someone just grabs your bags and they're not official? Has anyone ever experienced that? They're just a guy and you realize they're not like with the airport. They just start carrying your stuff and then they want you to pay them money or things like that. Or if you've been in some cities or some areas where someone just comes up at a stoplight and starts, cleaning your windshield without you asking, and you're that awkward of like, I don't want to pay this person. He made my windshield dirty. And then all you have is a 20 and you're like, oh no, anyway. But that's probably what it was. This guy probably was desperate and started just doing stuff for someone who had money and then saying, oh, please give me some money. And what the citizen probably did was, knowing he was a Jew, trying to get this guy off his back, said, okay, all right, how do I get rid of this guy? Okay, I'm going to make him work with the pigs. No Jew would ever work with the pigs, either these unclean, disgusting animals. He won't take this job. But the famine's so severe that he takes the job. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he had come to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. So he makes a plan. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. Treat me like one of your skilled laborers is another way to translate that. So he's not repenting here. It's important to see this. When the story begins, he wants to tell his father what their relationship will be like. And when he tells the father in the beginning, he wants the father to give him what he thinks is owed to him. And now he's in this dire strait, and he comes to his senses and he says, all right, I'm going to die here. I got to make a plan. Okay, wait, I know there's food in my father's house. I know there's food on my father's property. So what should I do? Okay, I got to go and say, I sinned against him and ascends heaven. I'm not worthy to be called his son. Hire me out as one of your hired hands. Hire me out as one of your servants. He's going to go back to the father and again tell the father what the relationship is going to be. He's not going to go back and say, I've sinned. He's going to go back and say, I have sinned. Here's the new plan. You see me as a hired servant. You give me a trade or something like that. And he's probably thinking, then I'll make a living and then I'll start paying you back. But that's going to be the relationship, Father. You're going to be this person. I'm going to be who I decide I'm going to be in relationship to you. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and he put his arms around him and he kissed him. So he set off to go back to his father. While he's still far away, his father notices him. His father sees him at a distance, which implies that maybe he's looking. Maybe he's looking regularly. Maybe he's always looking, waiting to see that sun on the horizon. He sees him and he's filled with compassion. Literally, his guts are torn up and he runs to him. No one over the age of 15 in that society runs, unless maybe you're a soldier. No father would be caught dead running. The father's garb was more like a dress. You would have to gird it up and you would be running. It could expose yourself and things like that. He runs. He's humiliating himself. He's shaming himself. He's possibly running to get there before any of the other people in town get there, because they would come and reject him. And he wants to get there first and decide what the relationship of this son will be to the rest of the town. Because the town's going to go out there, probably on behalf of the father, thinking they're doing a good thing, and they're going to reject him and cut this person off and kick this person out of their society. And the father's going to get there first and decide what the situation's going to be. So he gets there. He's filled with compassion. He ran and he put his arms around him and kissed him. And here's where I think the son understands genuine repentance. As he is changed by his father's run towards him, his father's compassion towards him, his father's humiliation on his behalf, his father wraps his arms around him and he kisses him. Then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. It's different than what he planned. He planned to say, Father, I've sinned. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me a hired servant. He doesn't do that. He says, Father, I have sinned. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. That might not sound like a big distinction, but it's huge. He doesn't tell the Father what the relationship is going to be anymore. When it started, he said, I want this out of our relationship. When he planned on coming back, yes, there was some repentance in there maybe, but I want this to be our relationship. Now, in his Father's arms, he just says, Father, I've sinned. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And he stops. It is in the Father's hands to decide what the relationship is. And for the first time in this story, he doesn't try to tell his Father what the relationship is, but he surrenders to the Father and says, whatever you decide our relationship is what it is. And the Father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best ones, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. And the Father's answer is, you are my son. So we are going to celebrate, because you were dead and now you're alive. You were lost, and now you are found. That's usually the awesome end of this story sometimes. That's not the end of this story. And it's important. Now, his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. What's this ruckus? He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. The father is celebrating. He is rejoicing that his son is alive. The older son has heard this, and he is angry and refusing to go in. Why is he angry? Probably for a lot of what we would see as good reasons. Who would be angry potentially? One, you've lost a ton of your stuff. Now the father, and the father had divided up among his kids, which is kind of like the right of possession. The children possess it, but the father's still free to do whatever he wants until he dies. He can still buy stuff, sell stuff, lose money if he wants to, and things like that. I have friends who own a business, and their dad gave the business to all the kids, but the dad still, no one tells the dad to stop doing something. He still does whatever he wants. Because he started the business. Same thing here, right? So he's going to come back and say, wait a second here. We're already down a third. Now he's back. Are you going to give him a third again when you die? Are you cutting into my portion? Wait, you're killing the fatted calf. You're using resources. You're putting the robe on him, so he refuses to go in. What he does is just as shameful as what the younger son has done. He is humiliating his father. This would be like a record-scratching moment, right? You're having this huge party. What would be expected of the oldest son would be you have your dignitaries. This is a big, important thing going on in the town. No matter what you have, you should stop what you're doing. You go in, you say hi, you greet, you welcome, you show hospitality. Instead, he embarrasses his father, makes a commotion, refuses to go in. Now, what a standard Middle Eastern father would do, what would be expected in this honor and shame culture, the son is doing something to humiliate, to shame the father. The father could go out and disown and tell off this son and say, no, this is what you're going to do. The father again leaves the house. This is what happens. His father came out and began to plead with him. When Brian read it, it said he entreated him. He could come out. There's a couple different words that when you talk to someone, some of them are like face to face, he's yelling at you, or he's upset with you, he's angry. It doesn't say that he entreated. It means he came alongside and put his arm around his son. He walked with him side by side. He doesn't come out yelling. He comes out willing to listen to his son and pleading with him. He says, he came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, the older son, listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, not his brother, this son of yours, can't call him brother, came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes. You killed the fatted calf for him." The son should have started with father and addressed him appropriately. He doesn't. He says, listen, buddy, right? All these years I've worked like a slave for you. All these years, he's doing exactly what the younger son is doing. He's doing exactly what the younger son is doing. The younger son said, "Father, I want this to be our relationship where you give me stuff and I have no responsibility." Or, "Father, I want this to be the relationship, I'll be your hired servant." Here's the older son. He says, "Father, this has been the relationship. I have been a servant to you. I have served you. I have done everything right. In response to that, you should be throwing me parties. You should be giving me what is owed me because I've been a faithful servant to you." That's what I want our relationship to be, Father. I want our relationship to be, I do good, I always stick it out, I always obey while my worthless brother goes off and does stupid things. But I'm always good. In response to me being always good, you give me what I have earned by being your servant. The father's answer. Then the father said to him, "Servant, you are always with me?" "No." "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead, and he has come to life. He was lost and has been found." Both sons make the same mistake. The father bears suffering and shame and humiliation for both of them. He leaves his house for both of them. At the end of the story, he has left his home. He has left what should be a joyful party of a day to come out to his oldest son and say, "Son, you're not my servant. All that is mine is yours. When you were born, the day you were born, you had all of this. You never had to work for this. All I have is yours. But son, look, we have to rejoice today. How could we not rejoice today? Your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. This is a day of rejoicing." The Pharisees should be picking up what's going on here. There's one person who's not found at the end of this story. We don't have an answer. The older son, who's wondering why his father is welcoming sinners and eating with them. The older brother is sitting there at the end of this story wondering, why would my dad, who I've served, welcome sinners and eat with them? How does God see you? If you feel like a lost sheep, how does God see you? If you feel like a lost coin, maybe not really far away, but you're lost in the house. A lot of people who are part of a church feel lost in the house. They show up, they're here, they come to things, but they feel lost even in the house. How does God see you if that's you? If you're the younger son, if you've squandered a lot of life in reckless living, how does God see you? If you're the good older son, who's always done the right thing, now hates your little brother who's a screw-up, and is angry that your father is so gracious, how does God see you? Here's how God sees you. You are his son, you are his daughter, and he loves you. That's the starting point. That's the first vital relationship. That's the beginning of the vital relationship you need for the rest of your life. To start there and to know, wait, when he looks at me, the answer is yes. I am a son, I am a daughter, and he loves me, and he searches for me, and he looks for me. Love is hard to define in our world. I want to talk a little bit about that. Love is this kind of hard to define thing sometimes when we say people love. Here's what his love is like. It is a search for you love. His love is like the good shepherd that goes and searches. It is a come to be with you, what Christians call the incarnation, that like the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes and finds the lost sheep. This Jesus has left heaven to come and to be with us and search for us. It is a search for you love that God has. It is anguish and suffering for you love. It is physical suffering for God to love you. When the shepherd goes and finds that lost sheep, we usually look at the story and say, yay, he found the lost sheep, and then we rejoice. And we don't think about what it takes to drag a sheep back for over a day. Do you know what a sheep weighs? They can weigh 120 to 150 pounds. You know what the hills of Israel are like? I don't. They're bad from what every book that I've read about tells me. I've seen pictures. It's pretty bad. So the shepherd would put the sheep around, tie the sheep's legs, so you're just carrying this backpack of 150 pounds, and then you have, so basically to keep your hands free, so you could use a staff to help you climb mountains, and then your hand when you fall and things like that. It is a physical, arduous journey of sacrifice. The father in this story suffers emotional anguish, humiliation, and rejection. He doesn't cut off the relationship. He keeps the burden of the relationship and faces the rejection of the son. So he suffers rejection and humiliation out of his love for his children, for both of his sons. What's so fascinating, and I said I'd get back to this, Islam has used this story for many years, and when they look at this story, they don't see suffering. They don't see humiliation. They don't see any need for a sacrifice or media. They say, look at this story. This is a story about the Islamic world's Muslims see Jesus as a prophet. So they look at this story and they see Jesus telling a good Muslim story here of what God is like. They see, oh, God's this great father, right? And he's merciful and compassionate. This son does a lot of evil things. He runs off. He does evil. When he comes back and apologizes, God takes him back. Jesus is telling this great story, and Christians have messed it up, right? Look what's in the story. You don't need a mediator. There doesn't need to be a sacrifice. It doesn't need to be suffering. It doesn't need to be any of that. We just need to come back. If we do wrong, we come back. We apologize to God. He takes us back. That's settled. He just forgives us. This is the difference, I think, between the Christian faith and a lot of other faiths. Whether we see God as a servant, where if we screw up and then he forgives us if we apologize, or if we see him as a father and we're his children. Islam does not see that in this story. They do not see this. I see it on every page. And I think they're misreading this horribly, because there's intense suffering. There's sacrificial, redemptive suffering of the Father. There's sacrificial, redemptive suffering of the Son. The incarnation and the atonement are oozing in this story. This story is often called the gospel within the gospel. It's why I'm telling it today as the perfect picture in my mind of what to understand, of how to understand how God sees us. He is like this father. He's like this shepherd. He's like this woman. And they're searching and searching and searching. They're surrendering their own rights. They're giving it up. They're being humiliated. They're being rejected, all to find us. It is an anguish and suffering and atoning for you sacrificial love. There was once a story of a C.S. Lewis story. C.S. Lewis, Christian apologist, kind of this great Christian thinker. He was at a seminar for a comparative of religious studies. And a bunch of people were talking about what makes Christianity unique. What makes Christianity different? And they talked about the incarnation, that, God became man. And I might disagree with this, but they said, other religions have incarnation. There's times when God kind of becomes a man or takes on human form. So maybe that's not all that different, like Zeus pretends to be somebody or something like that, right? You've heard those stories. They said, well, what about resurrection? And they said, well, there's other stories in other religions where people come back to life. So they're thinking, well, so Christianity is not that unique. Maybe it's a lot like other religions. And C.S. Lewis comes in and he says, hey, what are you guys talking about? And they say, why is Christianity unique? And he says, oh, that's easy. It's because of grace. It's the only religion that's centered in the grace of God and not based on some work or some path where you get to God. And they sat and they talked about kind of the eightfold path of Buddhism, where you work and you live and you kind of achieve these higher statuses to attain something. Or how you're called to live the right way in Islam, or even like covenant in Judaism, and all these different religions of you keeping your end of the bargain and you working and then you achieving some level where God accepts you based on something that you did. And that's not what it is in Christianity. It's while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's while we were lost, Christ comes and finds us. It's God himself suffering to restore the relationship. It's God himself anguished. It's God himself rejected. And that's what other religions have such a difficult time with, that God could be someone who suffers or God could be someone who's rejected. And Jesus says, this is how God sees you. This is what you need to know. If we run into how are we going to love God next week and we don't get this, we're just going to fail and make a mess of this and show people a God that's not the loving, compassionate God of grace. It is a death to life, loss to found love. It is a rejoicing love. We have one thing to do, and that is to receive it. Receive it today. Let this be your starting point, the grace of God. If you're the older son, receive it. If you're the younger son, receive it. Put yourself in the Father's hands. Don't say, I'll be your servant. Just let him tell you you are his son or his daughter. If you're the lost sheep, just let him pick you up. If you are the lost coin inside the house, just let yourself be found. If you are the older son, don't reject this grace. Receive it. And one challenge for us as a community, if we're going to be a people that receive it, then let's go and be a people that eat with sinners. Let's go and be a people that share this grace with others. That if we have received it, the next step is always to model what we see. The Good Shepherd, what he did, he took responsibility for the lost sheep. That's the mission of the church. We take responsibility for those who are lost. And as Jesus came and found us, we as his agents go and seek to find others. Let's be a people, a community that's known for welcoming and eating with sinners. We take responsibility to go and find the lost. We don't... I wrote this down. Hold on. We search without counting the cost. We can rejoice in the burden of restoration, suffering, and hurting alongside people to help them be found. And then we can be the joyful community that rejoices at the success of restoration. I'm going to pray because it's very late. And then we're going to sing a song. Let's pray. Father, help us understand how you see us. Help us see this world through your eyes. Lord, I pray for each one of us wherever we're at today, wherever we've been, whatever we're going through, however we see ourselves, we're going to try to find ways to make ourselves acceptable to you. We're going to try to find ways to define who we are to you. Help us lay that down and let ourselves be found. Help us just receive what you've done for us. Help us receive our identity as your sons and daughters. Keep us from trying to tell you what we want to be, what we deserve to be, what we can be if we try hard enough. And instead, let us receive the identity that you've already given us. Let us receive the suffering you've already done for us. Let us receive that sacrifice. And God, help us be then a people who eat with sinners and welcome them. Let us be a people that go out and share your grace with the lost. It's in your name we pray. Amen.